Welcome back to the Roommate Reviews manga comparison of To Your Eternity. You know the spiel by now, manga and anime comparisons, impressions from the team, all following a summary of the episode. This episode is very dense, so we cannot be as methodical in our difference spotting as earlier episodes, so keep that in mind as we undoubtedly blow past some obvious differences. If you enjoy the video, please just try to keep in mind that a quick like goes a long way. But for now, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy as we take a look at To Your Eternity, Episode 4. Skipping the recap and intro, we open to a flashback of Parona as a child. While the anime opens with this flashback, the manga actually has it in the middle of an upcoming conversation. The segment in the anime is also much more streamlined, with Parona's older sister being much more succinct than her manga counterpart. A fun difference to point out is that the anime simply covers the sister's face with a shadow, while the manga has this rough scratching scribbled across her face. This obstructive abstraction, as Porifera wants to call it, is vaguely reminiscent of Oima's work on A Silent Voice. Anyway, besides some extra Parona coverage and some added panning, this scene largely plays out the same. The shot of the sister running off has some really nice lighting effects to emulate the plain white background used in the manga. There's a couple minor differences in the rest of the flashback, with added Parona coverage of her running, as well as some increased specificity in the dialogue in terms of time and the fate of Parona's sister. The anime removes some dialogue here that shows the Yanome provides offerings of some sort to the Ninana people in return for their sacrifice, in favor of keeping us with Parona's panic. I also just want to say I much prefer Parona's face in the manga when she's told her sister isn't here anymore. The anime gives her a decent shocked realization, but the manga's interpretation just exudes a lot more dread of complete understanding. I don't know, I just really like it and wanted to give it a shout out. Back to the anime, Parona runs out of the village looking for her sister before tripping over something. As she looks back, she sees a foot poking out of the ground before Parona wakes up in the back of a cart. Porifera brings up the possibility of this just being a nightmare, but I feel the portrayal of the scene in the manga kind of debunks that scenario. But then that begs the question. Parona has been missing for a week, yet managed to trip over the body of her sister, who would allegedly be a 2 days trip away. What happened during that week to put her sister in a position for Parona to find her like that? Maybe the sacrifice altar didn't exist when Parona was a child. It's an interesting setup. Let us know your theories down in the comments. Anyway, the scene ends with Parona whispering about the look on her sister's face, which is a streamlined version of the dialogue from the manga's ending of the flashback, before cutting to the title card. This dream is a very clear parallel to March's nightmare back in episode 2. The fear of losing a loved one because you ran away, the shame of the village, and the fear of ostracization. It becomes very apparent that Parona's driving motivation was to try and avoid March living with this same fear she herself has been carrying. After the title card, we cut to a wide-angle shot of the Yanome caravan, changing up the order of a lot of shots, but staying faithful to them all the same, before joining our Ninana crew in the back of a prison cart. The pacing is much faster here, with much less time being spent on March feeding Fushi. Although I gotta say, I love March's little gremlin smile in the manga every time she offers more food. The cart looks a little more spacious in the anime, but I think that's mostly just from having more surface area to work with in the frames. The anime also has much fewer cuts, giving us a more spacious view from two perspectives, rather than half a dozen separate angles. Parona and March start having a conversation with the old lady who chose March for the sacrifice, learning she's a prisoner. The old lady fills us in on Yanome's plan, as we get high-res close-ups of the matching manga art. The anime also uses this monologue to establish the trading of goods to thank the Ninana people for their sacrifice. Parona begins talking about how only the very old villagers truly believe in the sacrifice ritual, and this is where Parona's flashback happens in the manga. We get a very brief cut in the anime to signify that she still thought about her sister being sacrificed during this conversation. We get some coverage differing from the manga, and Parona and the hag finish their conversation. Parona is stumped, and a tighter repeated shot of Oniguma adds time and foreshadowing. I'd say Fushi starts vomiting all over the floor here, complete with his anime-only stimulation shiver. We spend more time watching the vomit pool up here, and the girls don't get admonished by the driver in the anime. The bathing scene gives March a towel, rather than the naked jaybird look she has in the manga. Fushi, remembering the boy, is very faithful to the manga, but the transformation itself is an anime addition, as we simply cut to him being the boy in the manga. I want to shout out the OST being the same song we get when Fushi first meets the boy as well. I really like the bit that plays as March recognizes Fushi. Also, towels added for everyone! And Hayase's there. Just watching. We get Hayase's line about leaving before it gets dark, which is what originally spurred March onto wanting to watch Fushi in the manga. There's some slight angle variances, but the flow of the rest of the scene matches up pretty well with the manga, with some extra close-ups of Parona and March, and some dialogue from the next scene thrown in to wrap things up. We cut back to inside the wagon, with our establishing shots mimicking the manga very closely. The conversation gets much more streamlined in the anime, focusing solely on Fushi being immortal. The anime also uses much fewer angles here, maintaining a wide-angle shot of Parona for the majority of the scene. We then get an added shot of Hayase walking up to the prisoner cart before handing the crew their Yanome clothes. Slight angle variation to the scene with some added coverage of March running. Note the sounds and the visuals as March undresses Fushi, as his skin appears from under the clothes. This is much more pronounced here than in the manga. Hayase also seems a tad warmer here than her manga counterpart. The Yanome reveal lines up very closely, only adding shots and recreating the manga's shots virtually perfectly. Right down to Fushi's awesome face as he smells food with March here. The anime cuts some shots of leashed March and Fushi, instead jumping right into a montage of March playing through the city. Porifera has more translation hangups here, as Hayase pays this vendor silently in the anime. But in the manga, there's a clear recognition of Hayase's rank. The LaCroix translation has Hayase get referred to as Master, while the Sent Scans fan translation refers to her respectfully, while offering a discount. The anime downplays all of this, clearly wanting to focus on March and Fushi's culture shock, more so than Hayase's character here. Also, March wanders off citing a smell, and this guy's over here selling baskets of fruit. There is no way she is smelling fruit in this open market filled with giant bowls of noodles and deep fried goods. There is no way. Anyway, as we delve deeper into our montage, we skip over Parona's closing line of chapter 5 for the time being, focusing on March's antics instead. The anime has March see a family, triggering a memory of her parents, while the manga has March see her family first, only to realize it isn't them. It's the difference between a story of disappointment and a story of reminiscence. Porifera really enjoys the composition of this page in the manga. Notice the shape, how it starts along the forearm clothes and descends with March's hair. March's leg even forms a heart in the white space center of the topmost panel. The letterman's window and Fushi's eyes also add balance and align coherently. This leads into March seeing the postman offering to send messages to a loved one. The anime gives us a wide shot of March ushering the whole group toward the post office, while the manga just has March get Parona's attention. Once again, the anime converts the 9 panels of this conversation into 2 or 3 sustained shots instead. There's some cut panels of Hayase showing March what letters are, but otherwise the framing of this scene remains largely the same. Barring Hayase's creepy, pupilless eye here, the more I stare at it, the more unsettling it becomes. We also get an added reaction of March when Hayase calls out her claims of writing. As March slams her palm on the piece of paper, we also get an anime edition of ink being all over her face after knocking the ink pot over. This may draw some symbolic attention to March acting childlike and mirroring the ink she wore, signifying that she was a child back home. The reveal of the map lines up fairly well with the manga, except with the anime having Hayase end the conversation and usher us to dinner, calling our attention away from the map. The manga has her end the conversation very blatantly and harshly, only offering dinner after Parona tries to cheer March up. Porifera wants to take a moment here to talk about the significance of the map as well. We learn that the nearest district has 40 different villages, and while we traveled for 20 days, we didn't see any of them. Parona's reaction to the map also establishes that while resources have been shared, technology largely has not, and it further drives home the lack of formal education as well. It's very obvious to us as a viewer that the Ninana people are very occupied and are slowly being weaned out, rather than outright murdered, so that the Yanome can get the land for themselves without destroying it through a war. Keep this in mind as we continue interacting with Hayase. Dinner is basically shot for shot between manga and anime, as we get a rather satisfying view of Hayase eating. I'm not weird, it just looks nice. March and Parona just don't appreciate it as they make fun of Hayase for using utensils and keeping her hair out of her food. The rest of the scene plays out pretty similarly, with only minor changes in the angles provided. But once again, I gotta point out how much better March's face is in the manga when Hayase jokes about her own eating habits. It's some great stone face. This conversation also works great as a double entendre, as these chopsticks were likely just given to the Ninana people with no explanation as to what they are. This leaves the people to literally scratch their heads. The scene lines up shot for shot from here, as Hayase asks March if she'd enjoy living in Yanome. Before she has a chance to answer though, it turns out the food was drugged anyway. Everyone passes out, and we get our commercial break cut. Returning from commercial, we get Hayase informing what seems to be her superiors about the events of last episode. We get a couple added shots here and there, but the dialogue is much more streamlined. Also, just a small change, but the anime has Hayase call Fushi immortal, while in the manga she says he's invulnerable. I feel this shows March having a bit more influence on Hayase's observations in the anime. We then have prisoners get ushered into the cell, being told that if they kill the boy, they get to go free. This is clearly being done to show off Fushi's ability, rather than offer the prisoners a way out. As with all the action scenes, they're just easier to follow in the anime than they are in the manga. While keyframes try to be similar, there is far more coverage of the general combat between Fushi and the prisoners. Porifera really enjoys the Heg's battle cry, followed by Fushi's immense disinterest. The anime adds new dialogue here discussing the nature of Fushi's existence, and Hayase puts the fate of the Yanome people on the shoulders of Fushi's ability. We then get an almost montage-like coverage of Fushi escaping, with white flashes cutting around a large bulk of the manga's portrayed escape, as well as a monologue from our man in black narrator. Porifera doesn't like the staging of this scene. He thinks the whole thing could have been staged to flow a little better than jarring white flashes, and I think it's kind of hard to argue that. After Fushi's failed escape, we cut to him being thrown into March's cell, with Hayase giving March orders to make sure Fushi behaves. After tending to Fushi's wounds, we hear Parona calling from somewhere. This leads to some added footage of March running to her window, as well as an establishing shot of the castle our cast is trapped in. The shots here are very altered from the manga, with new shot orientations and streamlined dialogue. None of the framing really carries over between the two scenes, skipping over March worrying over Fushi still saying it hurts, as March asks the passing guards when she and Parona get to leave. The anime is mixing two panels here and can't have Parona reminding March to take care of grooming the dog, as we instead mash up March worrying about Fushi as he digs his way out of the cell to follow the guards in Oniguma. March has to take the guards' taunts alone without Parona's support, and it plays very well. The narrator's dialogue is completely cut here, as Fushi and March pop out of the ground, matching the manga keyframe and approaching Oniguma. Fushi biting Oniguma is also completely cut, skipping to March realizing all the spikes hanging from Oniguma's body are arrows. Once again, our framing here is completely different, with entirely new angles and shots for the whole scene, with lots of dialogue also being completely cut. Nice ending keyframe of March's face though. We cut past an entire page completely, as well as the montage of March taking care of Oniguma for now, instead choosing to focus on a conversation between Parona and March. The conversation they have is completely different, as the things they talk about in the manga haven't happened yet in the anime. The scene of Parona hatching a plan is an anime exclusive, as she's making this plan without the news of Oniguma's death. Spoiler alert. It's a fun little hypothetical play inside Parona's head, but it really doesn't add much. I suppose Parona's thoughts have been presented in the past, present, future, and hypothetical in this one episode. Before we go back though, just a quick shout out to the title card for Chapter 8. It's just a nice picture of Parona, and I want to twist Porifera's rubber arm to include it in the video. We then cut to a montage mashing together March caring for Oniguma and attempting to alleviate Fushi's pain, while Parona starts preparing for her escape. After the montage, we get a much larger frame of Oniguma's body as March begins talking to him. The anime has a great added shot of Oniguma's face here, before largely realigning with the manga for our March close-ups. March starts bonding with the bear, empathizing with its taste for human meat, speaking naively of how the bear will be able to return home once he's all healed. As March consoles the bear, Fushi suddenly stops saying it hurts, and instead turns his attention towards March and the bear, saying thank you, seemingly in the bear's stead. This catches March off guard, before she realizes that Oniguma has silently died. The anime and manga line up pretty well shot for shot here, right down to the panel of the narrator claiming the vessel opened. Although we do get a quick added shot of Parona witnessing Oniguma's death. Porifera was also very happy to see several reactors catch on to the empathic nature of Fushi early on, with him saying it hurts following March's removal of the first arrow. It's always nice to see people catch on to the foreshadowing and having it pay off. Let's take a second here to talk about the title of this episode, A Large Vessel. Porifera's been wanting to talk about this the whole episode. First off, the abstract image when the man in black says, "the vessel opened," is reminiscent of the city lights of the Yanome. This is because Hayase was attempting to create a connection with March through the wonders of her side. We can see parallels here from Hayase attempting to create a connection with March, and March successfully creating a connection with Oniguma. Two people attempting to befriend a former enemy. However, the differences show themselves, with Hayase being condescending to March's culture, pointing out her flaws and pointing out how her views are wrong. March, on the other hand, tries to understand Oniguma, understanding that the bear's nature is not malicious, and apologizing for the suffering humans have put the beast through, while tending to his numerous wounds. This empathic response is why Fushi follows March over Hayase, as understanding the pain and suffering of others is far more stimulating than telling people what they are supposed to be doing and how to feel. Anyway, back to the plot. After Oniguma's death, we cut back into Chapter 8, with Parona scaling the side of the prison wall. While most of this scene matches up to the manga, we do get a nice wide-angle shot here of Parona looking to the next window over. We quickly realign with the manga as Parona begins falling, with some added dialogue of Parona thinking about her sister. As she falls, we cut briefly to Fushi and March. Fushi reacts to Parona's pain, waking up March. From here, the anime breaks off into its own version of the scene, changing the events drastically. Much like last week, rather than point out how the scene has been changed, we're gonna give Crunchyroll that good faith shout out and say you should sign up and go watch the episode. It is basically a brand new scene. The following scene with Parona approaching March's cell is framed entirely different as well, with virtually no shared keyframes, but the feel of the scene is basically the same. While the manga ends the chapter with Parona's reveal of being the guard, the anime accents it with us finally seeing her sister's face. We wrap up the scene with Parona's speech from the end of Chapter 5 finally being presented, as we line up with the keyframe of March joyfully running towards Parona. Whew, boy, what a monster of an episode. Episode 4 covered 70 pages of content spread across 4 different chapters. I hope future episodes are not this dense, as we covered a lot, and we still didn't come close to pointing out all of the changes here. Porifera was hoping we'd get a bit of Chapter 8 in this episode. However, due to the wild pacing choices, we actually got all of it. But that is going to be it for this episode. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. As always, this video was written by both myself and my roommate Porifera. If, for some reason, you haven't gotten tired of hearing my voice yet, you can head on over to my gaming channel, where you can listen to me voice act a group of teenage girls and their one male friend as they all die horrifically every couple of weeks. Link down in the description below. Also, Porifera has more manga content planned, and that will be uploaded right here on the Roommate Review. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. But until then, we'll catch y'all next time. Ciao for now.